Well, hello everyone. Hope you're all enjoying being in your house, safe and sound. I just thought I'd walk us through Mussolini's Italy. So that's Mussolini's Italy, 1922 to 1945. We've seen some of this in class, but I just thought I'd go over it again and then move on to life in Mussolini's Italy. So, what is fascism? We've done this before. Quickly running through it. Fascists believed in a strong leader, as a dictator. They wanted order and a strong government that controlled everything in a country. They were highly nationalist, as I said before, and they believed that their country was the best. Now, that's kind of a slightly different form of nationalism that we've seen before. This nationalism is like extreme nationalism, where they genuinely believed that they were like the best country, and they could kind of go into any other country, take it over. Okay, so in Italy with Mussolini, we see that he does that with Ethiopia in Africa. He just goes in there, takes what he wants. It's a form of nationalism where they genuinely believe they're the best of the best. Um, so, why did fascism become popular after World War One? This is a really important one because this comes up in the short questions quite a few times. So there's four main things there you can see. Many Germans and Italians were unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles. You have to ask why. We've seen the Treaty of Versailles and what it was about. They were unhappy. Italy were unhappy because they didn't get land that was promised to them, and as we saw, that Germany was unhappy because there was so many different kind of rules and restrictions in the Treaty of Versailles. So just to go over them again, some of them was they could only have 100,000 men in the army. They weren't allowed tanks, submarines, or planes. The Rhineland was demilitarized, and they also lost about roughly 10% of their land to some neighbouring countries. So that's Germany. They were not happy with the Treaty of Versailles. They also weren't happy, of course, with the reparations they had to pay. That was £6.6 billion they had to pay to America, Britain, and France. So the second one there, fascists promised that they would make their country great again, and they blame minority groups for the reasons that the country was kind of poor or things weren't going the way they wanted to. So fascists promised that they would make their country great again. Had good leaders that basically were very good oratory skills. They could really rile up a crowd, and they made some big promises. The third one then, which is another big one we've seen before, the Wall Street crash in 1929. This created huge economic problems, including high unemployment. That's kind of the main one. There's also food shortages, healthcare problems, and after that, a lot of people lost their jobs. And people who were going through poverty had lost their jobs. They were more kind of susceptible to kind of these big promises where fascists made promises that they'd make things great again. The fourth one then is, as you can remember what we saw in the Russian Revolution, where the Romanov family were kind of shot against the wall, and everything was taken over by workers. We saw that rich people were terrified of a communist revolution in Europe. They did not want communism to rise in Europe. So these rich people, the industrialists, the kind of landowners, they actually funded fascists. So they gave money to the fascists in Italy and in Germany. Okay. So why did fascism become popular? You should probably pause the video now, and then see if you can just give out the kind of the answers that we looked at last slide. If you can't give them all, go over them again, look back in the video, read over it a few times. Make sure you know this question really well. Why did fascism become popular? Really important. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me here. There's a few different reasons. We had a Wall Street crash here. We also saw the Romanov family getting shot against the wall. So they didn't want a communist revolution in Europe. We saw kind of people like Mussolini and their big black shirt followers. And then we saw big food shortages, high unemployment because of the Wall Street crash. So go over them, make sure you know the different reasons. Why did fascism become so popular in Italy and Germany at the time? Okay, so that was the key points. What problems did Italy face after World War One? Unhappiness with Versailles, high unemployment, strikes, and growing number of communists and weak coalition governments. Okay, so this is all written in the book. Go over it, make sure you read through this in the book. Okay. Mussolini then. So we briefly saw a bit of Mussolini, but we need to know him because he could come up as a people in history question. Okay, and as I said, he's popular to come up. Benito Mussolini, his nickname was El Duce, the leader. He invented fascism, so he came up with this new ideology of fascism. He was a journalist and a politician, born in central Italy in 1883. Originally, he was actually a socialist. He was actually into like socialism and a moderate supporter of communism. But he owned a newspaper called the People of Italy, so he was able to get his views out to people quite easily. It's also worth mentioning he was a soldier in World War One, and he was injured in that war. He was kind of sent home from the war. And after World War One, he was unhappy with Italy. A lot of Italians were very unhappy with how Italy was after the war. And after dabbling with the newspaper, he kind of started dabbling in politics, and he founded a group called the Fascist Party. Now, fasci in Italian means fighting, so kind of like the fighting party. He said he was going to fight for Italians. And it's important to note that in that first kind of election he went in, 1919, he won no seats. So he lost that election. He wasn't very popular. People really didn't know about fascism. They didn't like him much. He was a kind of really an outsider. He didn't have popular support at all in 1919. But we're going to see how that changes fast. There's a few pictures of him there. So he always kind of presented himself as a bit of a strong man. So down here in the corner, he's there with his shirt off, posing in front of people. He's in a military clothes here, in front of a big crowd in Rome. So he used to give these big speeches in front of lots of people, and he'd always have his military gear on. And it was just kind of showing that he was like a soldier in World War One. He always wanted people to know he was a strong man. He was this kind of fighting man, kind of a dynamic politician, different to politicians that had come before. And up at the top here, we've got Mussolini in his big pose. He's always does these kind of like eccentric poses, and those guys around him, some of them with the black shirts and the military medals, they're his supporters, and they had the nickname the Black Shirts, and they become very important. After a while, they become very important. They start to shut down his kind of enemies and his opponents, and we're going to see how that worked out. So this is a good question, a good way to start the essay off. How did Mussolini come to power? So Mussolini criticised the Treaty of Versailles. He promised to make Italy great again. He didn't like the Treaty of Versailles, and at this point you should go back over it, make sure you know the terms of the Treaty of Versailles really well. Okay, so maybe pause the video here, make sure you can write down maybe 4 or 5 notes on the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so next one is Italy's government was weak. So after World War One, they had very weak governments that weren't sure what they were doing. There was kind of political chaos. There was elections every 2 or 3 years. People were unhappy with that, and Mussolini said he was going to stop all that. He promised stability for a country that was very unstable at the time. There's very high inflation in Italy, which meant, in practical terms, it meant if you went to the shop to get bread, something very simple like that, 1 week it was a small price, the next week it was a massive price. And actually how it worked in extreme circumstances was that if they went to even just get a weekly shop in Italy at the time, they had to have a wheelbarrow full of money. It was because their currency devalued so much. If you're interested in that kind of thing, it's important to maybe look it up on Google, have a search about currency inflation. Very interesting stuff, but I won't go into it now. The last one then, Mussolini's supporters with the black shirts. He attacked communists and stopped strikes. So the communists in Italy, they kind of were encouraging workers to go on strike. They thought they could kind of copy what happened in Russia, and the black shirts and the fascists did not want a communist revolution. They hated the communists, and they attacked them wherever they went. So they stopped strikes. They beat up protesters. They got involved in that kind of thing. And businessmen saw this, and businessmen, industrialists, landowners, the kind of wealthy who owned things in Italy, they paid Mussolini and the black shirts to stop the communists and to stop strikes. So the fascists were getting paid by the rich people in Italy at the time to kind of stop a communist revolution and stop that from developing. So as time went by, Mussolini became popular with people. He became more and more popular. and he was able to kind of leech off maybe the unhappiness of Italians at the time. He gave them big promises, and his popularity began to grow. His black shirts kind of got rid of his opposition, and he grew in popularity with a lot of people in Italy. So this is the big one, the March on Rome. In October 1922, Mussolini announces that unless he is appointed Prime Minister, his black shirt followers would march on Rome and take power. So it was this basically a thing where he said he was going to march into Rome, take over everything by force. His supporters would kind of control everything. And this terrified the government at the time. It terrified them because they knew Mussolini was kind of a force to be reckoned with. I think this picture up here is very important. So we've got Mussolini, and if you know who that is behind him, that's a statue of Julius Caesar. If you can remember way back in first year when we looked at the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar was an emperor, very powerful man. He made the kind of empire expand massively. Big hero for some Italians. Mussolini standing in front of him giving a speech, and that's not by accident, that's on purpose. He did the same poses as Julius Caesar, and he wanted people to kind of see them as both leaders, great Italians that were going to make the country great again like it used to be. So he would, talk about how great the Roman Empire was, how great the Renaissance was, and he was like, we're going to go back to, Italy being in power and Italy being a leader in the world again. He promised this to the people. So that last thing there, King Emmanuel III, he's the Italian king at the time. He was very nervous about this march on Rome, and he basically didn't want to order the army to stop Mussolini, because he knew that the army and some of the police at the time, they actually supported Mussolini. They didn't want to go and attack Mussolini. So he did something that was quite kind of cowardly, really. He probably thought it was very clever at the time, but he made a kind of a deal with Mussolini, sort of a deal with the devil, and he appointed him prime minister. So the king appoints Mussolini as the prime minister. It was an attempt maybe to make him quiet, make sure that he didn't kind of do anything rash, and kind of bring him into the fold. This plan backfired. It backfired completely. So he appoints Mussolini prime minister. But so at age 39, Mussolini is the prime minister, the PM of Italy. He made a promise that he wouldn't march into Rome, but he actually broke that promise, and he marched into Rome with his supporters. And this is where we see, this is where he takes power. He's now the kind of big guy in charge. He's now the leader in Italy. He's controlling everything now as he marches into Rome.